Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
So, Kelly and I have spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks diving into the world of Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
And now that we've both finished the game, we've been diving even deeper into discussions on how we can bring the world of Zelda and Tears of the Kingdom into D&D. We did a previous video where we looked at Link's arsenal and all the tools that he has at his disposal, which you can check out right up over there. But the other major thing that we were looking at is the lessons that we can learn as DMs from Tears of the Kingdom.
Drawing on inspiration from media, whether that's books, movies, your favorite TV shows, or video games, is one of the most important and one of the most effective ways that you can make yourself a better dungeon master. And there's a lot that dungeon masters can learn from Tears of the Kingdom when it comes to creating adventures and designing dungeons in particular.
Just a note for those who are still playing the game, there will be spoilers in this episode. For the most part, we are going to try to stay away from story elements or major plot points. We are going to, however, be talking about the sages, the different locations, and the different dungeons that you will encounter in the game. Towards the end, we will have a spoiler warning for a section that will dive into the end game section. Because we do want to talk a little bit about that. But we'll warn you before we get there if you haven't gotten there yet.
And I'll just say for myself, I found the story of Tears of the Kingdom incredibly engrossing and rewarding. And I do recommend, if you're running around the entire world trying to finish every side quest and find every shrine and unlock every Korok, maybe finish the game, because it's actually really worth doing. Tears of the Kingdom is perhaps my favorite Legend of Zelda story since Ocarina of Time.
I agree with that. I was a big fan of Majora's Mask story-wise, but I think since that era, not to downplay the other Zelda games, which also had great stories, but I think Ocarina of Time was a 10 for me, story-wise. This is the next 10 for me.
Yeah, and the story is told in a very interesting way.
So with that, let's start discussing our first major point. And I think that one of the best design concepts in Tears of the Kingdom is the 4 different dungeons, but more so than the dungeon, is the environment and journey to get to them.
Yeah, in Tears of the Kingdom, Link's quest begins by sending him off to the 4 domains of the various people of Hyrule. The Rito, the Gorons, the Zora, and the Gerudo. And in each area, Link is going to be engaging with one of the champions of those people and then delving into an ancient dungeon of some kind. But in all 4 cases, Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom really takes its time and builds up the story towards the dungeon and makes just the act of getting there, of finding that location, a major component, and it does it really well.
In several cases, getting to the dungeon was actually as exciting or maybe even more exciting than the dungeon itself. I found that once you kind of knew the general direction you were going in, you had to interact with elements of the world that felt super cool to journey to. Spoilers for the Wind Temple here, but when you are approaching Rito Village and you see the giant storm cloud up in the sky, and I remember thinking, like, I have no idea how I'm ever going to get there.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, you have to go get there. And you find the path, and that path is wild, it is epic, it is so cool to get to that storm cloud, and then you have to enter the storm cloud to get to the dungeon. The whole process is amazing. The Fire Temple, you have to go into a volcano, and that whole journey, getting up the volcano, then down the volcano, incredible.
It really is a great example of environmental storytelling and using fantastic locations to build up excitement and tension as the players approach. And I think that especially one of the things that both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild absolutely nailed was having these landmarks in the distance that foreshadowed all the amazing things that are going to happen there. And so, just as you said, you see that there's something wrong with Death Mountain in the distance. As you approach the Gerudo Desert, there's the sandstorm that's kicking up around the Gerudo town. And as you head into the Zoro's domain, you see that all the waters are polluted and covered in muck and slime. I think that first takeaway of introduce in the environment something is wrong as the players approach. And then introducing a landmark, a physical thing that the players can see in the distance that is a clue to an exciting location, but also just in the respect of Death Mountain and of the storm over Rito Village, begs that question, how am I even going to deal with this?
And that's the beautiful thing of going from how am I going to deal with this to, oh, I'm dealing with it. One of the beautiful things that Zelda does so well that is really hard to do in D&D, because D&D is a verbal storytelling game,
Yeah.
and Zelda is a visual storytelling game. But we can use aspects of this to remember that when you're playing Legend of Zelda and you walk out onto the cliff face and you look out upon Hyrule, you can see Hyrule Castle looming in the distance, Death Mountain, the Storm Cloud, Gerudo Desert. It's all laid out before you, and you see 100 places that you want to explore. So for Dungeon Masters, when you are at a vantage point, when your players have arrived on a hilltop or a mountaintop, take a minute to describe the things in the distance that they might not even get to for weeks. Describe the castle that they're adventuring to that's going to take them a month to get to. Describe the mountains off in the distance with a weird ring of smoke around it that just makes them say, wow, that's really cool. And then, 5 adventures later, you're going into that volcano or into that castle.
Now, while as Dungeon Masters, we can't quite use the same visual medium that Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild do, we do have some visual aids that we can use in the form of props. For me, I was so inspired by the image of Hyrule Castle in the distance that when we were commissioning our Dungeon Masters screen for Dungeons of Drakkenheim, that vantage point looking out over the city with the landmarks was actually what we wanted. We wanted to have for that, here's the castle, there's the inscrutable tower, the crater, look out and see. Now, unless you're an artist, you might not be able to create this yourself or commission an artist, but one thing you can create that does do this very effectively is a map. A overworld map, especially one that is evocative or illustrated or even just says, "Here be dragons," written on it, can actually capture a lot of this feeling for your players and inspire them to explore, go off into other directions, and have a few bits of inspiration. And so a map benefits from having a couple labels. Again, the aforementioned, "Here be dragons," or "The ruins of the castle." Just a couple evocative sentences that label a map, even if it's a simple map that you've just scrawled or something that you've made, say in Wonder Draft or using Incarnate, that can do a lot to engage this sort of thing. And Breath of the Wild does do that as well, too, with the way that the map is revealed as you explore the different landmarks. So you could combine these ideas and borrow the map revealing of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom with your prop and have a map that is uncovered as the players explore it.
I think that you could just whole cloth steal the tower idea from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and just have special locations that are on each point in the map that when the players get there, that unlocks the map and they can use it as a vantage point to see everything before them. So I think that that's a really cool concept and a beautiful idea to take for D&D. But going back to the path of the adventure, which I think is the key takeaway here. Mm-hmm. So we're adventuring to these incredible locations. We've looked out upon the world. We saw that we want to go to Death Mountain. On our way there, we stumble upon the Goron city. In the city of the Gorons, now you have the inhabitants who are around this location. So Interesting location, incredible journey to get to your temple, but you also have people and a supposed safe haven. But in each location that you arrive, there's that problem. There's the muck of the Zoras. There's the sandstorm in the Gerudo Desert. The famine affecting the Rito. Each city...
And the Gorons are all eating marbled rock, which is a very interesting metaphor that is surprising for a game rated E for everyone.
Yeah. I won't go any more into that, but yeah. However, I think that there's something really important here, and that is in each city, you meet the people who are being impacted by the dungeon.
Yes.
And you meet a hero of that city who wants to help.
Yeah, and I loved the sages in this game. All 4 of them felt like Link's friends. And one of the things that you were talking about in Tears of the Kingdom is that this was one of the first Zelda games where it felt like Link had friends.
I often feel very lonely as Link. Majora's Mask is one of the loneliest games ever, in my opinion. There's a lot of Zelda games where your friends all kind of leave you, and at no point did I feel like there was a strong connection that these people would care about me after the game ended.
But in this case, the sages promise that they'll always be with you.
And not only that, but even in the light dialogue that happens, I got the impression that when I met each sage, that they were like, we have become good friends, or we were previously good friends, and I just like you, Link.
The takeaway here is that Tears of the Kingdom really shows how to have an active, helpful, non-player character that contributes to the adventure, doesn't overshadow the heroes, but has a positive relationship with the heroes. I think that all of the characters, Yunobo, Tulin, Riju, and Sidon, they all earnestly want to do what's right. They have the same goals and objectives, but they also have their own self-doubts to overcome. So I think that the recipe here is that the player characters love helping an NPC who seems very competent and capable, but just has to get over their own hang-up and be a hero themselves. Player characters like building up NPCs, and then when they're useful and helpful and they've been bestowed with confidence, there's something about that. There's something about, like, it's very interesting how easy it is to make player characters love a person who's having confidence issues, but that they can help solve.
I agree. And I do think that that's one of the best takeaways for NPC design. The NPCs in this game, you help them overcome their journey. They're all on a journey of self-discovery that Link participates in through the dungeon linked to their home city.
Yep.
And their home city is in peril, and they need to help. The peril is a beautiful thing that we should use in D&D. One of the most surface level, easy to explain ones is arriving at Zora's and seeing the whole city is polluted.
Or the snowstorm where everyone's starving.
And the snowstorm,
very easy to implement in any of your campaigns.
And what I love is that you make a problem that is linked to the dungeon. And somebody in that town who is an NPC that will join the party because they need to help their people.
Yep.
The heroes are going to help their people, but having a hero who also wants to help their people, and you get to see them rise up to be like the leader of their community.
Yeah. And then they bring a really interesting ability that is central to solving the dungeon.
That's the other beautiful thing, is we don't want our NPCs to overshadow the heroes, but what a great idea to say you have an NPC who can cast one spell that the party doesn't have access to. You look at what the party does have, and you have a character that casts that one unique spell, and you design a few puzzles in the dungeon that spell can be used to solve, or maybe you make a unique ability.
And they're all, I think one of the takeaways from this is that many of them were spells that players might not immediately want to take or not necessarily use in that way. Using Gust of Wind to power propellers, using, say, a water conjuring spell to clean up an area, or generating fire, or giving the players explosives is always fun, and that's why I like Yunobo so much. All of the sages gave you this power that you could then use throughout the world and the rest of the adventures, and not just the dungeon that you were working on with them. So I really like the Sage powers. They were really neat and added a lot to the game. I mean, obviously Tulin get that one first just for the game, but it adds a lot to the exploration capabilities. But I really like this model for having a helpful NPC that follows the characters into the dungeon.
So already we have this beautiful structure of getting to the adventures, the city that's linked to it, the hero that we're going to acquire. But when we actually get into the dungeons, they're mostly puzzle dungeons. And I actually think this is interesting, is that a lot of the combat occurs before you actually get to the dungeon.
Yeah, the dungeons, the most combat heavy dungeon I felt was the Lightning Temple. And it had a great encounter in there, and then you had the boss battles at the end. But for the most part, all of the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom are all about what are you going to solve through. That said, there's also a couple shrines. Some of my favorite shrines in Tears of the Kingdom were the ones where you were stripped of all your equipment except for your unique powers.
I didn't love those.
Oh man,
I struggled with
those ones. They were definitely a challenge, but I liked it for that. And I think that brings into this general idea of Tears of the Kingdom really empowers the player to solve puzzles and problems their own way. Do you want to do this puzzle honestly, or do you want to build a crazy contraption that completely bypasses it? The game doesn't care.
How many of you used your glider, the ascend ability, and having enough stamina to solve the fire temple instead of actually using the rail carts? I know I climbed a bunch of walls I probably wasn't supposed to be climbing to get to the places I needed to.
Oh, totally. Or you could just make a hover bike and fly up to wherever you needed to be, or strap the fans on the side of the minecarts and fly them awkwardly wherever you needed to go. You could have solved those minecart puzzles, but you didn't have to. And the game definitely oscillated between when did you need to solve the minecart puzzle and when did it want you to break it. There was one set of minecarts in particular where the tracks were broken and you had to strap rockets to the minecarts, where I was like, okay, I feel like the game is telling me now, do your own thing. Solve this your way.
And I think this is so important for Dungeons and Dragons, and I actually think this lesson is deeper than just good dungeon design. I think it's also good DM etiquette. As a young DM, I would structure my adventures and my dungeons in a way that I would lay down a puzzle and be like, they have to pull the levers in this order to open the door, which is still a cool puzzle. But all my puzzles were predetermined with a set answer.
Yes, this was the process. Everything has to go this step, this step, this step, this step.
I remember, so that the day that I learned to break this formula in my head, you broke it for me. And it was, I made a room. I had been thinking of Zelda, and I'd been thinking of the Fire Temple from Ocarina of Time. And so I had this room where there was a door up top and a door that you came in, and a bunch of platforms over a pit of lava, and certain platforms would crumble as you stepped on them. As soon as you discovered that the one platform was going to crumble, you went back to the open entrance, you cast Fly, you flew up to the door and lowered a rope. And for some reason, as a young DM who was just getting started in D&D, I forgot that that was a thing that you could do. You could fly up and lower a rope. And at first I was like, well, now they're not going to engage with my puzzle. But I think the lesson here for DMs, it's your job to put a problem in front of the players and be open to any possible way that they can solve it.
Yeah, and I think Tears of the Kingdom shows you how you have a wide range of possibility within that. There are certain puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom that are very particular about the ways to solve them. I'm thinking about, there's one shrine that you need to unlock by casting a shadow in a very particular shape on a wall. So you have to go to the shrine at a specific time of day. You have to put the right things in the right places. There's like literally only one way to solve this puzzle.
I just did that shrine yesterday.
On the flip side, there were several shrines where I'm like, I don't know how you were supposed to do this. I just cheesed it entirely.
I mean, also, if a Korok says, "Get me to my friend," you just strap a rocket to him sometimes, and
Yeah.
away you go.
Yeah.
So there are no rules. In D&D, obviously, there's a lot of rules. But the thing is that spellcasters, crafty players, be open to their suggestions. And also, you don't have to plan as much. I always say as a dungeon master, one of my favorite things is it's my job to put the pit in front of the players. It's their job to figure out how they're going to get over it.
Yes. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you can oscillate in your dungeon design between those really tight puzzles that have a very specific solution and the more open-ended ones. And I think that a mix of both is pretty healthy, although I do certainly think Tears of the Kingdom leans more towards the open-ended puzzles, and I liked that quite a bit. Whenever the puzzles that only had one specific solution were there, they kind of stuck out like a sore thumb.
So putting all of those together, you start to get a pretty vivid picture of these beautiful locations that lead to these incredible dungeons, and they're all interconnected.
Yes.
To the city, where you meet the hero. The city's being affected. You travel from the city to a fantastic location that is affecting that city. You go into the fantastic location, you find the dungeon, you conquer and defeat the boss, and you solve the problem of that location. And I think that we should literally take that concept and use it more in D&D. I think that so often it's not displayed enough that the problem of the dungeon is affecting the people of the city. Mm-hmm. And by solving that dungeon, to return to that city and have the people rejoice. Now they have a hero. Now they celebrate you.
Yeah. And the fact that you got to see Gyarados Town buried in sand, and then your actions saved it. The Rito people were starving in a blizzard, and that blizzard ends, that ice melts, and the town is restored. Many of the NPCs that you interact with in the Goron city are not themselves. And when the problem is removed, you can actually interact with them, and the businesses open back up again. So that change of the world makes the players feel like their actions are making a real impact.
And just like in Zelda, don't be subtle about it. I think that be as big as you want. Like, you arrive in the Zoro domain and everything is muck and everybody says how horrible their lives are right now. Once the dungeon is gone, crystal clear blue waters, everybody's happy. Go big with it. Have something drastic that is affecting the town that is easy to see in every corner of that location. Mm-hmm. Don't make it like, oh, a few people have complained about the drinking water because they think it might have something in it. And then you have to go on this epic adventure.
No, it's like the water is poisoned and we are dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be blatant with it, because then when the problem disappears because of the hero's actions, it's so obvious that their actions had good consequences.
And it's a good way of communicating what's at stake and showing to the players, if you go on this adventure, you will affect and change the world. This is what you accomplished. And in that respect, it's a very coherent environmental storytelling theme. Tears of the Kingdom very effectively connects the fantastic location, the environment, the problem the people are facing. All of these are all deeply interconnected, and it makes it feel real and believable.
The desert has a sandstorm, has zombies, and a pyramid.
Very coherent theme.
The Gorons have a volcano that's causing gloom eruptions and new rocks to form.
Mining weird rocks, yeah.
So weird mining going on in the mountains, gloom everywhere, and you have to go into the volcano. Again, coherent theme with the Goron rock people. Gorons easily could be dwarves.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, totally.
The Rito are living in the wintry territory and therefore are plagued by the famine that is affecting them because of an ongoing storm that won't let up.
Yep.
So you have all of these beautiful themes that are just really coherent. And the dungeon, the people, the city, and the problem all feed into that theme.
Yep.
It's great.
It really, really connects quite strongly. This also yielded, I think, one of the darker Zelda stories. People were in crisis in this Zelda story, and it really felt like you had to make the difference. It felt like Link was the catalyst for change. The heroes of their respective people were helping their people hold on. They were helping them survive. I think Sidon is the best example because he's there conjuring clean water just so that his people can survive. And that makes you feel like, oh, this is someone that cares about the situation, that wants to do something about it. And he is doing something, but what he's doing is only going to hold that situation on. It's not going to fix it. And you then come in and say, I can help.
And that's I think very important, that the heroes show up and they're that extra bit of force needed to allow the people in that town to find a solution because the heroes are here. I think it's beautiful storytelling, and I think each of these should be borrowed, used, and interpreted for your own designs and dungeons. But there's one other part of the game, and I'm going to give warning right now that we've talked a lot about the dungeons. If you are still playing through the story, we are about to do spoilers for the final encounter in the storyline of the game. So you have been warned. If you haven't gotten there yet and you do not want to hear about it, stop watching now.
See you next time, and come back once you finish the game.
One other aspect that I think is incredible was the design of our final boss battle against Ganon.
The build-up and the foreshadowing to this boss battle was superb. Because not only did we get the flashback sequences, the tears of the dragon that told us the story of what happened to Zelda, it very heavily foreshadowed where the final boss fight was going to go. Like, you knew going into that what we were going to be dealing with, and it delivered in every way.
No, it delivered so much that, like, there are multiple times getting to Ganondorf that you dive further into the depths, and each time you're like, oh, we're going down.
We're going there. So over the course of discovering the flashbacks and everything and finding the Master Sword and getting to that point, we get a lot of the story of Tears of the Kingdom that tells us what happened to Princess Zelda. And that all builds us up to, drawing the Master Sword from the Light Dragon and going to confront Ganondorf, who, predictably, as you get down into the depths, you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the depths under Hyrule Castle, and things are starting to get really dark, really hopeless. You're running out of your Sunday Lion salad, and then you go down that final passage that's a callback to the very first passage at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
So you've come full circle now, and you dive down one last time, and you have to face the army.
So the first thing, painting this picture, first of all, Hyrule Castle is like the staple of incredible locations.
Yeah.
But you've already explored it at this point in the game. But then you diving down into the depths below Hyrule Castle is just, it follows all the rules that we've already talked about for how to build good dungeons. It's been shown from the beginning of the game that there's a giant hole there.
Yeah.
And now you're in it. You're going through the ruins of the basement of the castle that then go into a deep cavern. And then what do you have to face? An army of all of the monsters that you have faced previously in the game.
But the cavalry comes in and your friends come in to help you.
Having the NPCs show back up to help out in the war against an army.
Such a great finale move to pull. When the friends show up, it's evocative of like the Riders of Rohan showing up at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, right? It's here is the cavalry come, and I love fighting alongside them. It felt epic. And then when the bosses show up again for the boss rush, and then they're like, "We got this, Link. you go on and deal with Ganondorf.
That's actually a great way to cut it off, because you don't want the NPCs to steal the show in the final combat, but to have they help you fight the army, and then a bunch of big monsters show up, and your NPCs are like, you guys go on ahead, we'll hold them here. And you don't even have to worry about it anymore, but that still feels epic.
It did. It felt great, and you got a great image there.
Yeah.
Then you get the sword duel with Ganondorf. And first of all, again, I have to just say, I felt Matt Mercer's performance as Ganondorf, probably, credit is due, best Ganondorf performance.
Yeah. I loved Ganondorf in this game, and I loved the 3-tier boss battle.
Yep.
The first fight...
Warm up. Really feel like...
You learn what this combat's going to be like. The first few minutes... And I'll admit, I'm maybe not the greatest video game player. I love them. But the first minute or so, I was like trying to get my timing down with his attack. So I got smoked a few times. Luckily, he doesn't do massive damage. I had good armor at this point. So he's knocking me around until I learn the timing. And that's what the first phase of this boss battle is. So if you're building a multi-phase boss battle, round 1 is about learning what this boss battle is going to be.
Warm up,
like.
get into it, then escalate, and everything gets harder.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I appreciate about Tears of the Kingdom's boss battle, this final showdown, is that it didn't really introduce so many mechanics as it was overwhelming. Like, I got the sword fight that I wanted. Like, for me, I always have felt, and maybe this is just my opinion, that duel between Ganondorf and Link is always, for me, more exciting and challenging than when Ganon turns into the giant monster. There's something about that the swordsman fighting. I remember Twilight Princess ended with that too, and I just loved it.
Yeah.
And it was very challenging. I especially when your Hyrulean shield gets blown up and your hearts literally get drained out of you.
But that is... And so there's another lesson there. So phase 1 is our warm-up. Phase 2 is hard mode. And you throw a few things in that are oh no moments for the party. They don't need to be devastating and like instant death. But in this example, getting your shield destroyed and losing hearts permanently.
2 nice oh no moments in that creates that tension and stress. The first phase, you were like, I gotcha. Like, here we go. We're going to throw down. Then the second phase is about the villain comes back. They come back and forth, and it's the desperate battle. I was like out of Sunday Lion salad at that point.
I was out of most, like, I was almost out of shields.
Yeah.
I was running low on, like, I was getting fearful right when I got him down to the end.
And I think that this is the cool thing that Tears of the Kingdom does here, is that you beat him and you're like, and you know at this point that it's not over, because the game has foreshadowed to you through the story what's going to happen. And then to fight alongside Zelda as a dragon against Dragon Ganon, it was not like it was so cool. It was so cool.
It was the coolest moment in the game. And I want to talk about why this is important, though. There's 2 things that happen during this stage of the combat.
Yeah.
The second stage of fighting Ganondorf was really hard. The dragon fight was by far probably the easiest boss battle in the game.
Yes.
But I didn't feel disappointed by that, because I had just been through a really hard combat encounter. So now I'm getting what I would feel is a reward, a cinematic set-piece battle.
Yes.
The epicness went up 100%, but it got way easier. And I think that we should actually learn from this in D&D. If you're going to have a multi-phase battle, let the players warm up, then be challenged, then feel like heroes.
Yeah, it did. Like, I immediately, what comes to mind is like that old evil overlord rule is don't turn into a snake. It never helps. And I'm just like, you turned into a dragon, that's the last mistake you're ever going to make, man. And of course, it's great because it combined the mechanics that were really unique to Tears of the Kingdom, the aerial battle of diving down onto the dragon, getting in there with the Master Sword, and it felt great. Like, it felt so fun. I think it would be very hard to replicate this in D&D, but I think you can get there very easily by simply letting the players ride a dragon in the final fight.
There's so many ways to do this, but basically to have the fight escalate to a point where now you're in the final phase and the players get to use all of their cool abilities, and the bad guy isn't doing too much to challenge them at that point. It's just a straight up slugfest with all of their coolest abilities, and maybe they're riding a dragon.
Yeah, and there was a really interesting thing too that happened there. I don't know if you noticed this, but when you do go into that phase, you get your hearts back, and if you didn't have the Master Sword, you were given it. So there's kind of like the player powers up as well, and you get to do the most amazing thing one last time to really seal the deal.
Again, spoilers, but I think that one of the other important moments here was when Zelda gets brought back. I'm so glad that they didn't make it a cutscene. They let you dive for Zelda. Now in D&D, here's the thing. I don't think there was a way that you could fail that dive.
No.
But this is where a little bit of DM trickery comes in. I don't think there's anything wrong with you're falling through the air, you're reaching out for the princess, and it's like you got to make a dexterity check to catch her.
Or you just take it into complete narrative mode. And
But
don't
taking
worry.
it into complete narrative mode would be making it a cutscene.
No, I feel like you can do it by still saying, what do you do? And also asking the player, what does their character feel? And what do they think? Right?
Fair.
And really drawing out those emotions behind it, and you get there, right? And, you know, if you want to throw the die roll in there, part of the reason why you coax out the description from the player is so that you've got an excuse to give them advantage.
Yeah. So I do think that was a beautiful moment, and I think letting that be something that you got to participate in was valuable. So yeah, you could, I think that you're right there, and we could just do a more narrative, but it's a narrative back and forth.
Yeah.
I think that looking at a game that you love a lot, whether it's Tears of the Kingdom or any game, but then analyzing it in these ways, what can we learn about the dungeon design, the locations, the characters? What can those teach us about storytelling in a medium that involves interacting with that storytelling? Because despite the fact that Dungeons and Dragons in video games are very different in a lot of ways, if you boil them down, they are a story that a group of people are playing along and interacting with.
Yes, and it's driven through the player's experience. And even though there is the dungeon master or the level of scripting, these games oscillate between that interaction between the system, the mechanics, the story, the gameplay. And so video games can teach us a lot of great lessons about how to do that.
So if you have any other video games that you think that we should talk about, that we can dissect and look at the lessons you can learn from, let us know what your thoughts are in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we create on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron by following the links down below.
And if you want to see our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, you can check that out Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more great advice for Dungeon Masters right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.